Hey guys, it's the Villaman here, and Apple has finally released an updated version of the Apple TV 4K. And it doesn't matter if you're watching it on anything from a TV or a TV with a soundbar, or if you have a dedicated home theater space with a projector and surround sound speakers. There are a few settings you should change immediately after you power it on, and in this video we're going to go over what those settings are and why you should change them. Stick around. So once the setup is actually complete, now first thing we go is to the settings, because this is where you make all the changes that we need to make. And if you go into general, then there's not much that we need to change here. This is all personal preferences, so that's not really what we're here for. The settings we want to change are in the audio and video, because after all, it's an audio and video device. So what the Apple TV does is it selects the 60 Hertz signal of your highest quality HDR format. So what I mean by that is if your TV supports HDR10 and Dolby Vision, then it will select Dolby Vision here by default. But since this TV doesn't support Dolby Vision, it supports HDR10 Plus and HDR10. The Apple TV doesn't support HDR10 Plus, so it defaults to HDR10, which is what we see here, 4K HDR. So some of you may see Dolby Vision here, and that's completely fine. All right, so once we have that selected, then we can go back and to chroma. So the Apple TV supports either 422 chroma, and it has by default 420. Now 422 chroma is a higher quality chroma and has better color information than the 420. So you should select that, and it tells you that you should have high quality HDR or high speed HDMI cables, but once you have a certified HDMI 2.0 cable, you should be completely fine. So wait, this remote is really finicky. I did select try it out, but my finger accidentally slipped a little bit and it changed. So once that's done, we can go to OK and move on. Now, this is another important setting which I think is very important to have enabled. So the Apple TV handles HDR content in a couple ways. So by default, it has match dynamic range off. So it doesn't matter what dynamic range the content is being transmitted in, it will always display the content in the dynamic range that you have selected in that previous screen. So if you're watching SDR content, standard dynamic range, it will still display that content in HDR. So the TV or the Apple TV will tone map the SDR content to HDR, which is not something you want done. I mean, the Apple TV does a good job of tone mapping, but that's not something you actually want if you don't have to, do it. So what you should do is enable that. So you have the Apple TV transmit the content in the format it was mastered in. So SDR content is sent in SDR and HDR content is sent in HDR. And also you want it to also match the frame rate, because it does the same exact thing with frame rate as it does with the HDR. So since we had 4K HDR at 60 Hertz selected in the previous screen, then it would transmit, say, 24 frames per second film content in 60 Hertz as well. And we don't want that. We want it to be as faithful a reproduction as possible. So we have match dynamic range and match frame rate enabled. The next thing, we don't need to check HDMI connection, because that's fine. If we had an issue with the HDMI connection, then we wouldn't have been able to enable 422 chroma, most likely. But unless you're having issues with your connection with your TV and the Apple TV, you don't really need to check your HDMI connection. And now audio output. Now this depends on where you or how you have your Apple TV connected. If you have it connected through a home theater system, then you will have it selected here. The audio format should remain on auto. If you have an HDR projector, you want to maintain the same settings for video, but what you do want to change is in the audio section. Now, in the audio output, once it says TV speakers, that just means that it's sending the audio signal through your HDMI cable. If you had things like, say, a home pod that you wanted to send the audio to wirelessly, then that's how you would go and select it right here. But we don't have that right now, so all we have is the TV speakers, which is essentially the HDMI output. And the setting you actually do want to change is the audio format. Now, if you have a Dolby Atmos capable receiver, then you want to make sure that immersive audio is enabled. The only immersive audio format that the Apple TV supports is Dolby Atmos. It does not support DTS:X or Oro 3D, so you want to make sure that Dolby Atmos is on and the change format is off, because when you enable that, then it will reduce the audio quality and you don't want that. So you leave that off and the only thing enabled is Dolby Atmos. Now, if you have, say, if you're in a noise sensitive environment, so say you're watching TV and people are sleeping or what have you, then you can enable this to actually compress the dynamic range of the content. But this is not something you want to have enabled throughout your watching unless you have some specific scenarios that need the loudness to be compressed, to be reduced. Navigation clicks, that's essentially all personal preference, but audio mode should remain auto because then it switches when necessary and you get the best by default. And then there is color balance. Now, the benefits of this color balance is to be determined, but this is something you essentially use to calibrate the output of the signal from your Apple TV. Now, it doesn't change the settings on your TV. What it does is calibrate the color output of the Apple TV itself, so the information that it's sending your TV. But those are essentially all the audio and video settings you need to change to have the best experience with your Apple TV. Alright, so now that we're done with that, there's some notes on a few things that I think you should definitely know. So first of all is the Apple TV 4K supports a max of 60 Hertz. So if you have a 120 Hertz screen, that's too bad. You'll be having a 60 Hertz output from your Apple TV 4K. And of course, it'll adjust the output frame rate based on the content you're watching if you selected the setting to match the frame rate. In the same vein, if you select match dynamic range and your TV only supports HDR10 and say the content you're watching on the Apple TV 4K is in Dolby Vision, then the Apple TV 4K will send a HDR10 dynamic range signal to your TV. In most instances, now I've seen on Vudu, the Vudu app specifically, where it actually reverts back to SDR and doesn't send an HDR signal at all if the content you're watching on Vudu doesn't match the high dynamic range format of your TV. So if you're watching a Dolby Vision movie on Vudu and your TV only supports HDR10 and you have match dynamic range enabled on the Apple TV, you'll receive an SDR signal from Vudu. I've seen it happen only with the Vudu so far. Dolby Vision is, in the case of Disney Plus, for example, it sends an HDR10 signal. In the case of HBO Max, it sends an HDR signal, and Apple Movies, it sends an HDR10 signal as well. But in the case of Vudu, that's the only one I've seen that sends an SDR signal, and it must be a bug with their system, but I've noticed that for a while and it still continues to this day. Back onto sound, Dolby Atmos, the object-oriented sound format, which represents sound as objects moving throughout your room, is only available on the Apple TV 4K when it's connected to a compatible device. So whether it's a TV that supports Dolby Atmos, like say the LG OLEDs and their more recent LCD TVs, or if it's a receiver which supports Dolby Atmos, or your soundbar, of course. So if the device that you have connected to it doesn't support Dolby Atmos, then you will not see the enabled Dolby Atmos setting in the Apple TV 4K. Operationally, it's extremely similar to the old Apple TV 4K. Now, of course, it has a faster processor, so you can play games faster and better with better graphics and all of that. But if you're primarily concerned with watching movies and listening to music and thus the audio video quality of the device, then it's functionally the same except for two things. Now the first thing is this new version has an EARC port. Now normally you don't find EARC ports on streaming boxes, but Apple included it in this Apple TV 4K because it enables them to send the uncompressed audio from the TV to the Apple TV via the EARC port, because that's what it's for, and then in turn send that audio signal to your HomePod if you're using it as a speaker connected to your Apple TV 4K. So it has a very specific use case. Otherwise it didn't make sense to me, because the audio that comes from the Apple TV 4K can be compressed or uncompressed. There was no limitation based on the port that it uses, being HDMI 2.0. The other thing is now it has the horsepower to actually play back HDR videos on YouTube, because the old version apparently didn't have enough horsepower to play back YouTube encoded HDR videos. But I hope you found this video useful, and like the video if you liked it, and if you haven't yet, then make sure to subscribe for more home audio and video content, including reviews and comparisons of the TV that you saw me using earlier. The Samsung QN90A Mini LED QLED TV, and more of course. There are OLEDs, there's everything. Thanks for watching, and until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood Villaman saying be safe and peace.